I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, which showcases inspiring professionals in the world of investment and beyond by focusing on their people and their stories. I'm joined today by Jennifer Strickland. Over the course of Jen's career, she's had a series of roles starting out in the annuity space, moving into private wealth, hedge fund business development, alternative asset business development, and most recently was head of business development for Pretium, a $50 billion specialized asset manager focused on real estate, structured credit, and legal opportunities. She's a board member of Women in Private Credit and an active advocate for mentorship and diversity within the financial services industry. We've been friends for many, many years. Welcome, Jen.
Decades.
Thanks. Decades.
Let's confess, decades.
I don't even remember how far we go back, but thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Aoife. And I also just want to thank you for taking the time to conduct this podcast, because I think you really understand how to bring the best out of people. And I've always just been very inspired by your energy for this industry. So thank you.
It is driven by people like you in it, and that's what makes it worthwhile. So I can't wait to have this conversation. So we got to know each other, I think, back in your HBK days. That goes back quite a while. Can you talk us through how you ended up in this industry, where you were born, what you studied, and how finance sort of made its calling, sort of got through to you?
Sure. Well, there was no one with financial background in my family history. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, which is a pretty small little town. And certainly I didn't have a lot of exposure, whether it be through school or people's careers, that would have led me to this. But the things that I think were kind of marquee events for me, well, one, I grew up in a family that really believed that your opinion mattered. So it's not like you had to be of some social level or et cetera, like that. My opinion mattered just as much as anyone else's opinion mattered. And I was very fortunate to go to the University of Chicago, which I was the only person from Arizona that year that went to the University of Chicago, just to kind of give you a sense for how isolated I was in that Arizona world. But it was Chicago that introduced to me the way to think using math in addition to storytelling. And I think if you were to like kind of go back at some of the qualities that made me who I am, I would say it's being able to weave together mathematical answers and having like a comfort with technology and combining that with how to explain a story. Like, why should someone care about these numbers or care about these results? So I think that's what really led me to my first job, which was Morningstar, which is quite a prominent organization in Chicago back when I was graduating. And I give them so much credit for giving me that love for mutual funds, for active management, for understanding that there is something different. You need to be able to explain what is the value that you're bringing to someone's portfolio. And Morningstar kind of really set the stage for that.
So interesting to already at that early stage marry the storytelling with the technical knowledge, because I think people often come to that later in life, that it's not all about the technical side, that it's about the communication angle. Were you just lucky to have had professors that marry the two, or different electives that brought you the two, or did you always just like a good story?
I think I always liked a good story. I just think, frankly, my luck was that Morningstar was founded in Chicago. And I was a Chicago grad. I really think that's kind of number one. Then one thing that Morningstar taught me versus maybe what other people might have encountered, I had the opportunity to lead a department at the age of 21. So at 21, I'm managing people. I'm working on an asset class that was not well understood. It was a combination of insurance as well as investments. And so that willingness to try something new and kind of off the usual run, that really gave me a lot of opportunity. And so that's where I would say Morningstar kind of really set that stage. And because of my work with Morningstar, I became more comfortable with finance. It's not like everything, when you're young, you can get a little bit kind of emotional about what's the value that you're bringing in the world, et cetera. And Morningstar gave me that outlet, and as well as gave me the opportunity. They were perfectly happy to have me go do presentations And I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal at age like 21. Again, I go back to like, that was normal. So Morningstar taught me about public speaking. Morningstar taught me about presentation skills. I was giving presentations to like hundreds of insurance agents as they were working on variable annuities. So those kinds of opportunities, and you're just like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and take those opportunities. And don't be afraid to say yes and grab that.
I love that. And what a great training ground that probably proved to be in some of the practical side. But just going back, to be able to run a department at 21, let's just go back a little bit before you got to Chicago. Maybe in your family, in those summer jobs, like my daughters have done refereeing or they've done lifeguarding, you must have had something in you that led you to just jump into something like that. So was there anything in your prior job history or family dynamic that led you to just jump into that?
Nothing that was obvious to me at the time, but I think you're completely correct. I was the oldest of four girls. And so that gave me two motivations. One is you got to know how to lead people, especially if you've got like a family of four kids. But also for me, I think it also led to the let's help women understand investing. That was kind of almost a no-brainer for me. Like, how do you help women become more successful? And that's kind of part, I think I've always felt that that was sort of part of my mandate. Just how do I build on that? But yes, there was, I think, all kinds of things. Now that I think about it, I was the editor of the school newspaper. I won a couple awards on science fair. You had to design the experiment, set it up, etc. And again, these are things that were kind of unusual to see from someone from Arizona, especially a girl.
I love it. And especially that early interest in giving back or that, reaching down from the ladder to pull someone up after you. And we'll talk about that a little when we spoke about your work in women in private credit, as well as just in mentorship in general. But let's stay on career just for the moment. Mm-hmm. So lots of different places, private banking, annuities we mentioned, alternatives, and now real estate more recently. Anything that you learned in particular cycling through these? I mean, the private banking, I'm thinking, is kind of a very personal angle.
Well, so what are some of the things that I learned? One is that alternative investments can offer so much opportunities for investors, and they should be made available. And that frankly, people do need that extra advice, especially for high net worth. I think I am unusual in that I started out in high net worth before I did institutional. So I've given advice to people both from how should an institution think about hedge funds, private credit, but also how should we be thinking about it in terms of, high net worth as well. I think it really is incumbent upon the asset manager to make it very clear what is the value add they're bringing in their investment strategy, their deal sourcing, their in kind of unlocking additional benefits from their investment. They'd have to make that very clear. That's how you justify getting paid the extra return, not just because you earned the return, but also like you did it in a more kind of creative and interesting way. And I do believe it's very incumbent upon the manager to take that responsibility for helping articulate that to their clients.
And now into why you were so well known in the industry. I don't think it was just because you were mentoring and helping others and on a high profile role. I think you are well known because of how good you were on the client service business development side. You were definitely one of the exceptional practitioners from a very early age. So what were the values you bring to that? And maybe what do you think were the secrets of success?
Well, one, I actually care that people understand. You can't underestimate that desire. Like you really have to care that you're bringing that value to someone. And I've always had that care. Can't always explain to you why. But to me, like I really care that we're bringing value and thought and that we're elevating the industry, for example. So I always challenged the portfolio managers. I'm like, how can we introduce that or bring that? Because sometimes there's a temptation to kind of do things the easy way. But I find if you actually take that time and help identify how is this technology marrying together and bringing value to not just the individual that you're working with, but maybe also they could be representing teachers, for example, and just really helping the portfolio managers understand that I view it as part of their obligation. And it's my job to help them do that. And if they let me do it well, then we're all successful. We're all very successful together.
One of the other things you're known for is having been very strategic and intentional about some of your career moves, some of which have involved, I mentioned, cycling through different sectors, which is not always easy to do. Alternatives are complex, highly complex. Real estate, its own nuances. And you've also moved across the country, different states, large organizations. What has driven those moves?
Well, you have to stay relevant. I think that's also something to remember. After a while of having been like in mutual funds, I could have just stayed in mutual funds, but that again wasn't where some of the more interesting returns and value add were. So I very deliberately moved into asset classes that had a little nuance to them, a little difference to them. And it tried to partner with a firm that was delivering good value and effective value to those end investors. Did a lot in hedge funds for a long time. But while I believed in hedge funds, it was time to move on. And I think one of the asset classes that has been really a phenomenal growth area has to do with private credit. And there's different ways of executing that, like whether it's through private asset-backed securities or through corporations. But I've always had a belief that there is more alpha that could be generated if it's in a market that's maybe less closely followed. And, I feel very fortunate, especially through the hedge fund years, I was able to learn some really creative ways of earning returns from public markets. But if I hadn't challenged myself to move in the new direction, I'd be a little bit stagnant. And so maybe it kind of goes back to the, for example, becoming a leader at age 21. I'm definitely not someone who's going to just be stagnant, always looking for new ways of growing and developing in my business.
It's so interesting. I see it as kind of setting yourself up for success because you mentioned staying relevant, and you may love the hedge fund arena, may love the people you work with, but if that is no longer as relevant to the client base, you as a client liaison and as developer of new business will not be set up for success if you stay in an industry that's losing its mojo, I suppose. But it does take a certain amount of foresight to be able to see where that puck is moving to. And also, what mindset do you bring to jumping in and learning something new, getting back on the learning curve?
Well, listen to the clients. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen to the allocators. That's the number one way. If you're listening to them and they're really not intrigued or they're not gaining value from a particular type of strategy anymore, then you should be paying attention to the strategy that really does matter to them. And have a good understanding, if it's a high net worth, do they value liquidity more than they maybe value having access to these more creative ways of earning returns? But yeah, to me, that's just always kind of been something I've tried to navigate on a regular basis. Also, I think someone once said to me, you should make friends with your client. And that's really good advice because your client, the allocator, the people who are benefiting from these returns, they're going to tell you why it matters. And that's also going to help you know if for your next move, am I making a move that actually matters in the world of investments? People are going to earn returns. Is that in a, kind of like a happy way? Don't mean to make it sound so Pollyanna-ish, but at the end of the day, if you're not helping teachers earn a better pension, or you're not helping individuals earn more income, and that matters in their financial health, then what are you doing?
One of the ways you make a friend in life and in business relationships through building trust. So how do you think you won the trust of these allocators across the country, up and down the spectrum of size? And there's a certain amount of honesty that has to come from you in order to win that trust. How did you go about that?
Well, I think the honesty that's key right there. That's one, being honest about how something might work, not work, etc. But two, also just answering their questions directly. I think there's a lot of people who are sometimes too afraid to tell the truth or to say, well, this is how it could play out. And also knowing enough about the markets that they trust your assessment. They may disagree with you over time, but I think that is probably one of the things that set me apart from others and made several of the allocators really appreciate the time they spent with me, because I could provide maybe some education, or if it wasn't full education, just, even just saying like, hey, being open about what could be the positives or the negatives they have to work with. Allocators have to make very important decisions with very little information. And you need to be able to kind of tell them what that is. And there is a temptation when you're in business development to kind of maybe keep things a little too Pollyanna-ish, maybe not completely following through on what's the positive, what's the negative. I just found being forthright with people built that trust. And then frankly, they would usually return that trust by maybe even educating me on some things as well. Because in order to be good at representing your asset class, you also need to understand other asset classes. So being able to call in an allocator and say, hey, can I pick your brain on how XYZ works and what people should be looking out for? And that goes back to like making you better at your game and the information that you have, having people rely on you.
And speaking of that, my next thought is around your leadership style, because we'll talk about mentorship, which I think goes far much more than a team that can go laterally in many different directions outside your firm. But within your firm as a leader, what would you say was your leadership style?
Well, my leadership style within my firm, like with my direct team, is to one, challenge them on how to think through on how to make something kind of work. So our job is sales, but we also need to inform. And I would also say avoid surprises. If you can make sure that you're avoiding surprises, that will help you, because that's probably the biggest killer for trust. If someone is surprised by what happens. Now, if you didn't know, obviously you didn't know, but thinking that you're going to kind of duck and weave, and it's just not going to work. So thinking through how you can help people become comfortable with something that might make them a little bit hesitant. I also try to work with people and like, okay, also understand like what are their challenges, especially with institutions. Like they have to convince certain people to buy into this as well. I mean, and this could be a career ending move for them if they don't do it right. So I'm a huge believer in don't surprise people. Give them a chance to kind of think some of this through. But I want the people on my team to be able to learn how to develop that as well. I think especially with younger people, there's a temptation to just keep everything rosy, and learning how to have that more sophisticated conversation with someone, maybe even to kind of share your perspective. Like that's going to take you from being just like an average salesperson to, a top of the line representative of an asset manager and truly a trusted resource for these senior people. And the other great thing is as you grow up together, having senior people say great things about you to other senior people, I mean, that's just like, man, that's gold. That's given me a lot of pride in my career, is that people have like highly recommended me to other people.
Absolutely. And also you're known as a mentor or a generous giver. I think you're known as a giver. And that is the giving without transactional expectation. That is quite rare. Before going to that, though, I'd love to just pick up on something about not making things too perfect, too Pollyanna-ish. And I think the reason people don't like that often is they shy away from difficult conversations, from conflict maybe, because they perceive that will generate conflict. So I suppose, how did you get comfortable, or how do you get your team comfortable, or recommend a mentee get comfortable with that difficult conversation?
That's one of those things I also learned the hard way. There have been times when I've been too afraid to share like what was a challenging situation, or kind of trying to bob and weave and dodge it. And it didn't work out for me, and I felt disingenuous for different reasons. Maybe it didn't work out for me. So some of that was like learning. And I would also say that I've learned a lot from other people, male and female, who are really good at like their people skills are just exceptional. So you're never going to put me in the category of someone where you're like, oh my gosh, Jennifer had exceptional people skills. It's more that Jennifer was willing to learn from other people who had really good people skills. And I could tell when it was like paying off, that someone was maybe doing it this way, or maybe, saying it that way, or let me see if I can kind of mimic that a little bit. Because I was always more of the math and science person, or doing the declarative story that, that was much more me. So I do think like the people who are just like really good, if you have a personality like mine, also try to mimic people who are really good caretakers of other people and learn from them. And I think that'll make you even better at your job. For example, like one of my favorite books I got in the London airport was a Templar. It's like the rules of people, for example. Here I am, this math person going, oh, just like eating up this book on the rules of people. Like, oh, that's such a great thing to learn. But if you can combine the storytelling, the genuineness, perception on what people are looking for, that's how you build these trusted relationships. You also have to be willing to ask people for what you need. Like when you're in a sales role, you need allocators to decide to move ahead and make a decision. So I would say having the guts to even ask at the right time, like, what do we need to do to move you forward? Let me tell you, that is not an easy question to ask.
Oh, no, that is the closer, right? That is the art of closing the deal. I've heard it described in many different ways, but I think that probably eludes the vast majority of people because there's an element of conflict. They might say no. So you have to risk that difficult conversation.
Yes,
yeah,
you do. But that is the secret for being kind of exceptional at this business. If you think about it, that's what the exceptional portfolio managers do when they're like trying to close a deal, or, they got to find a way to close as well. So you're going back to like how I want to develop people. My ideal talent development would be to incorporate all these different ways of engaging with people and also understanding the investments well enough to be able to say, here's why this investment actually makes sense for you. Because sometimes I think with young people, they're so excited about what they're selling, right? And they go this is very excited push or promotion for what they're representing. But the people receiving that, I'd almost feel like they're puppies, just the enthusiasm, as opposed to saying, well, here's how this could be really useful to you. And here's how this could fit into what you're trying to accomplish.
I've also heard it described that this elusive or mysterious moment of when you try to close the deal or actually get the decision to be made, that the allocator, they want to make that decision too. They need
Yes, they do.
that bridge to be crossed.
Yes, they do. And so many allocators, they need to put money to work, but they're also maybe nervous about doing it in a way that gets them in trouble. I mean, they don't want to lose their jobs. But one of the reasons why I've been so involved in the mentorship and let's say the women in private credit organization, or even the diversity and investment exchange, is because it's kind of helping people find these safe forums to exchange ideas with each other, to then be able to ask these questions. I don't think you come out of the womb knowing how to ask to close business. You might come out of the womb knowing how to make people have fun with you, like way more than me, for example, and that's your advantage and you should build on that. But that's why I work very closely with these other organizations, and I've also really enjoyed mentoring other people, is like, how do you deepen the talent? How do we create a safe space for people? And I found these organizations have been just like a phenomenal forum for providing that extra information, that extra courage that really helps people become more senior, either in their organization or in their asset class. And I do believe in supporting both men and women. In fact, some of my favorite male allocators have even admired the quality of female allocators in private credit, for example. So anything I can do to kind of help facilitate that sharing of information, providing a safe space to call someone and say, is this a smart way to approach this? And kind of providing them with a very, very safe place to do that. That's how you're going to get more senior women and men, frankly, whether it's in private credit and in other asset classes. But being able to create that, like when I first joined the industry, there was no one like that for me. There was someone who was very good at helping me become better at recognizing what people wanted, helping to complement my technical side. But I would say that one reason I give so much back from a mentorship standpoint is because I've seen, like, frankly, how much it helped me. And being able to, like, you can call someone at a bad moment, at a vulnerable moment, and they're not going to betray you. I think that's what we all need in our careers to continue to grow.
Yeah, that gets back to that trust. And actually, it's the whole origin of this podcast series, which I started 5 years ago, is because I used to listen to Women at Work, that podcast, and I found that it was just a repertoire of experiences we could draw on, as well as actual tangible scripts sometimes. You mentioned you might come away with something from a mentorship meeting like that. Sometimes it's the script maybe to make that ask, that final ask, because somebody like you asked it this way and it worked. And I don't think we all have that. We don't all have that kind of repertoire. And clearly mentorship, and you have been known and cited as a mentor, I think, coast to coast and probably around the world as well, and up and down the industry. So thank you for that role you're playing. I'd love to move now to this next phase for you. So your illness and the setback that has caused, but equally, I suppose, the chapter it has been. And how would you describe this chapter? And maybe you can take us to the beginning of the chapter.
Absolutely. So I never viewed myself as a vulnerable person. I always viewed myself as a strong person. And so that's why I did business school. That's why I did the CFA. I've done so much hard work in my life. And again, I come from that thought process of, if you work really hard, you can push through almost anything. The challenge with cancer is that is probably true in the beginning. And at first, I thought I was going to be able to beat cancer. The initial indications were that cancer was gone, and so I'm like, oh, right. And I wanted to prove that even someone who has defeated cancer can go on and be successful. So that is how I've always viewed myself. This cancer, however, this second round, when it metastasized, I'm at its mercy. And in a few days period, I had to accept not only the emotions of, like, what does this mean for my family? That's very, very significant. But as a professional, it's also like a big slap in the face of your career is over. It's done. Doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how much money you've made. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're not done yet. Your career is now done. And so how do you get used to that without falling apart when you've spent so much in so many decades trying so hard to be ahead? So I would say that was probably one of the hardest things for me. The other hard thing for me, and quite frankly, is, one reason we do this work is we want to be paid. And all of a sudden I'm facing nope, that's gone, Jennifer. You're now kind of moving to a much, 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 much lower tier. So I think that was really hard for me, because it just didn't jive with what I had always viewed as my vision for me as success. So to feel like I was leaving a legacy, I just listened to what people were saying about me. What were they saying about the time they've spent with me? Like, I had some amazing stories shared with me about things I said to people that you're like, I barely remember that incident, but yet clearly it made a big difference for you and helped make you successful. And you're like, oh my God, that's so touching. So that's kind of been the new focus, is accepting that I have limited time left, but that doesn't stop me from being able to share my appreciation for people, and they can share their appreciation for me. So sometimes part of when we're very, very ambitious, we sometimes forget that other people helped us get where we are. And sometimes that's like your husband. Like, I don't know how I could have raised two amazing young women without the help of Sean Yang, for example, or frankly, eaten good food if he hadn't been willing to do dinner, as well as kind of follow a separate career. And similarly, like, Sonali Wilson has been a real inspiration for me, because she's willing to share the benefits that she's gained from the relationship. And I've come to realize that's something I hope more people do. Take a moment and thank people for maybe that short moment or that insight that they gave you, because that's a valuable gift that you can give someone.
Well, absolutely. I think what I'm hearing is, well, so many things I'm hearing there, but Feedback. I think we spoke earlier about this idea of difficult conversations and taking time to share experiences and give someone the feedback we have administrative assistants appreciation days, we have teacher appreciation days. We don't always have mentor appreciation days where we actually stop and give the feedback and say, well, that actually was really useful. And I think that we have busy lives. And I think just the reminder to do that, I think, is yet another gem of wisdom that you are sharing here with us.
Thank you.
And I think you said that having cancer forced you to reflect on who you are and what is important. And I suppose what is important now, because we've spoken about the career, and I don't think you could have given any more to your career and made a better impression on the industry and are continuing to do so with these words of wisdom you're sharing and have shared. So I don't think anyone could say that. So that feeling of digging deeper and knowing you dug as deeply as you could at every time and at every place and never got stale and never became irrelevant, always pushed, I think that should be a huge achievement. When you say what is important now, what have you thought about? Because I know you will have thought about this.
Yes. So what is important now? I mean, one is trying to minimize the burden of the illness. I mean, I think that's important on the people that I care about. If I have a friend who's going through a rough time with a job, for example, and I have the brain power and energy to give to that person, I'm there. I will give back. Because the hardest things that we're always navigating are like, did I make the right decision here? Did I make the right decision there? So that's who I am. I'm a giver. And I want to continue to do that.
And I hope you can also reflect on that career advice, which was about asking for help when you need it. Because I know you're a giver and you will always be a giver. But I suppose I hope you recognize that so many of us want to give now back so that you will see that. You will see that. And gathering this wisdom is another gift of giving you are doing here. This has obviously also been a time of reflection. When you think about highs and lows of your career or setbacks, challenges, I'm still asking you to give us examples. Give us examples that you learn lessons from, because I'm sure that is a massive well of wisdom too.
Well, one of the top things I like to share with young people, because it applies today, which is this was advice that was given to me by a gentleman in the industry. And he basically said, if you have to eat a shit sandwich, don't chew on it, just swallow. And I think that is really good advice now. It's really good advice for anything that we're dealing with. There's going to be a lot of really bad things that come your way, frustrating, maddening, and you're just much better off finding a way to just like swallow it and move on from it than brooding and chewing on it. So I would say, especially if I could go back and give that to my 20-year-old self, that's super helpful. I've had a lot of other people tell me that one also really helped them through a tough period. And I hope my daughters are listening, because sometimes you got to breathe through it but you got to move on.
So important. It's the anti, first of all, that image, I don't think I'll ever forget that image. it's pretty vivid, but the lack of rumination, because just listening, one of my favorite podcasts is Hidden Brain and Shaker Vedantam, and it's a psychology kind of podcast. And it speaks about the more we think about bad things, the more we are reminded of bad things. So it is this kind of spiral that rumination can start. So I love that advice to just get over it. If you were to say any creed or motto that you live by, and you've given us lots of examples already, but if you were to maybe sum it up, how you see the world, how you would like to be remembered as seeing the world, what would you say?
Well, I would say one motto or one creed would be that be proud of what you're contributing. If you're not proud of what you're contributing to the world, then it is time to reflect and reset and maybe even revisit what you're doing. But you should be proud of your work. And if you're not proud of your work, then you're wasting your time. So I think that's very important. I think also just be mindful of others, help others along the way that you're helping yourself. And that's another way to be proud of yourself. Because that's always worked for me.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I could not have imagined the amount of different spheres of wisdom and just insight that one conversation, barely 45 minutes, could contain. I think this has been a great journey from a career that started boldly and didn't let up ever since. Thank you for your honesty, your trust in us, and for all you have done to give back from the very beginning to the industry, to your friends, to your colleagues, and to strangers who I think will all benefit from the wisdom you shared here. Thank you for sharing your insights here.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you. To me, it's truly an honor to have this conversation with you because you've also taught me the importance of giving back in this industry. And this is a fantastic example. So thank you.
This podcast was recorded with Jennifer when her health was stronger, so we would encourage anyone who wants to send a direct note to her to know that she prefers email at jstrickland@silkworld.com.